Hi, I am Melanie Addington from Oxford, Mississippi. I am a female with glasses, headphones, and a mauve-colored dress, and I have multiple sclerosis. My background is blurred. I live on the traditional lands of the Chickasaw. Before I introduce our special guest today, I want to note that Southern Circuit screenings are funded in part by a grant from South Arts, a regional arts organization, in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts. For more information about both, please visit southarts.org. Today, I want to introduce our special guest, director/producer Salome Chasnoff, and producer/writer/interviewee Carrie Sandahl. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks.
Good. I'm really excited.
Thank you so much. We so appreciate being here. I'm sorry I forgot to unmute myself.
Oh, it's fine. We have to get that through at least once.
I'm an older female with kind of zebra hair, dark brown and white, and black glasses, plaid shirt, and Defend Our Communities t-shirt. And I'm up in my attic office. You see some posters and books behind me. White-skinned, Chicago-based.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm a white woman and I have my hair pulled back in a ponytail. My background is blurred and I normally walk with crutches or use a wheelchair. And even though that's not visible in the screen, I think sometimes it's useful information to have as context.
Same. And for those who do need it, there are closed captions within Eventive for this conversation. So I want to start today because we only have 30 minutes and I have a million questions. First, I just want to start with Salome. What prompted you to even create this documentary?
Well, one of our writers, producers, Susan Nussbaum, when she became disabled in her early 20s as a result of an accident, she hadn't been prepared for disability, and the only messages she got were from movies.
First question is for Salome, and that is, what prompted you to even make this documentary?
You know, one of our writer producers, Susan Nussbaum, she was in her early 20s, an acting student at the Goodman Theater, and there was an accident, and she became disabled, and she had no preparation for disability. She didn't have anybody in her life that was disabled, and she had no information about it. She really thought it was the end of her life. And she started paying more attention to where she was getting messages from movies. And she and I had already been making films together with girls with disabilities. And she talked about wanting to address this issue of the images of disability in mainstream films and how it affects people who are disabled and people who are not disabled in terms of how they think of disability. And so we started collecting images around themes like clips, like blind men and women, or magical creatures, intellectual disabilities, and we'd string a montage of clips together and show them in groups and have conversations about it. And around this time, Carrie and Allison Patsavis joined the team as well. And we would film these salons, we called them. And they were really popular and very eye-opening in terms of understanding the ideas people got from films. And eventually we decided just to make a movie. And that was like a decade ago.
Documentaries take so much longer than people realize. It's so fascinating, the selection of clips you selected. And this can be a question maybe for Carrie. As Allison said in the film, the idea of being called inspirational becomes very grating. People really are mostly taught this, though, through movies, because so many of us don't have somebody disabled in our lives. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I became involved in the movie as a professor. So I teach a class called Disability in American Film at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And my background is in theater and performance. So all my training was in theater and performance. And I think as a person who was born with a disability, I've kind of grown up with the inspirational narrative haunting me in my daily life. Everything from, teachers to a physical therapist to random people on the street casting me as that kind of figure. And then as a student of theater, I noticed how often this trope is used in drama, and how not only that trope, but all of the tropes that we go through in our film are that we are thought of in everyday life in terms of those same tropes, and they come from the media and other cultural sources. So I think it's because it's so pervasive and so limiting, because it's an expectation that no one can ever really fill. And it also perpetuates this idea that we only exist for non-disabled people's moral guidance. And it doesn't give us much of our own self-determination. It's kind of coming from the outside as an expectation.
Absolutely. And you all really went through so many of the tropes, horror being such a big one, or even just fantasy films. I have a friend who lost all 4 of her limbs, and every time there is a disabled character on screen, of course, they're the bad guy. Can you, either one of you, talk a little bit about that representation, where you think that originated from?
Well, I think the kind of the fear, the mystery, the lack of knowledge, the lack of experience, the lack of identification around people with disabilities generates all these either overly positive or overly negative stereotypes. And, I think dating back as far as the ugly laws and even farther, when people with disabilities were kept inside because they were, too offensive to be seen on the street. And I also think that for a lot of, when Susan and I were working with young people with girls with disabilities, they would do interviews on the street, and we would get random opinions and beliefs from people passing about disability. And some people thought that it was contagious, or that, if you pray to God, it will go away, whatever it might be. So there are so many, so much lack of information. And when there's lack of information, fantasy fills in.
That's a great answer. Since your movie has started, there has been a slight shift in the dynamic. We've seen Crip Camp. Last week at Sundance was Coda, which is about deaf community, and yet actually just a story. They also happen to be deaf. Sound of Metal has come out. Do you see the landscape shifting, becoming slightly better?
I'll take that one. I definitely think that there are stories with more complexity. I haven't seen Coda. Crip Camp, I think, is an exception in that it comes directly from disability culture, disability community, and it addresses the social and political and the personal altogether. So it doesn't reduce a disability story to some of the tropes we're talking about. And it shows disabled people as generative and fully human. So I think that's a real positive move. And we're seeing other disability culture representations that are doing similar things. I haven't seen Coda, but I did see Sound of Metal. And I think that film, which also was one that our collaborator Susan Nussbaum thinks is a very interesting representation. I thought that it did a great job of capturing kind of the mixed feelings and the ambivalence one can have to the experience of disability. But I think also as someone born with a disability, it still felt to me like someone having a sudden transformation into it being a deaf person. There was so much fear and almost horror around that moment. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't be frightening. And I think, sudden impairment is frightening. But building off of what Salome said, it did kind of cast disability is this very fearful thing. And then coming over that fear or adjusting to disability is the narrative. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but so it took that common psychological adjustment trope or finding meaning or, larger questions, existential questions to disability. It did follow that, but it did in such an inventive way and so moving that I think that it's more of a nudge in that direction. And I was disappointed that the actor who plays Ruben was not deaf, because I could even think of some deaf actors who would have been great in that role.
Absolutely. I think that's such a huge issue, both in the disability and the trans community, in actually casting those who are disabled. I think that's become, and you talk about this in the film, sort of the Oscar bait. Like if you play handicapped, then you become the award winner. Salome, can you talk a little bit about that? Why it's become such a trope in Hollywood to like magically become this disabled person on camera and then show up on that stage?
For sure. I just want to say something add something to what Carrie said about Sound of Metal, because I agree with everything she said, except I will say that I personally, my eyesight has been deteriorating pretty quickly over the past few years. And as a filmmaker, I was able to relate to Ruben's plight. And even though as Carrie said, his response was extremely large, it did contain, for me, an authentic current of anxiety that I feel, like walking,
right.
not being at my age, not being prepared to change my life.
And not just about the disability, but completely losing your livelihood, which I felt was sort of that overreaction.
Yeah. So I got it. And he, of course, he's much younger. And so I kind of also gave him a little break in terms of his really, really kind of a big reaction, but I related to it. In terms of Oscar bait, I think that, where a lot of acting is really stuck in Stanislavski and the kind of the whole behavior, like being able to physicalize something is a skill. And I think the transformation from this kind of unusually beautiful, fit human to what you talked about before, being the kind of not so beautiful, not so perfect character, the transformation so dramatic that they get a lot of points for that. And I think it also taps into the inspiration narrative, because people have been were inspired by that character. That character changed the life of another character, of an able-bodied character. So they have that power as well, and that magical power. So.
Absolutely. I think that's, yes.
So I add something, Melanie?
Yeah, please.
I think, and I want to agree with Salome as well, that it's not that there isn't some authenticity or truth to any of these narratives. So I do want to acknowledge that. I think part of my frustration is more how the media treats it. This goes along with your Oscar bait question. For instance, there's a review in the New York Times and I just pulled it up while we were talking because I just want to give you an example. The headline is Sound of Metal Review. When the music stops, the healing begins. It's just so melodramatic. And then there was an article, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about a very long article about the actor's process in creating that character and how extreme it was for him as an actor and distressing. So those stories just kind of perpetuate that idea that playing a disabled or deaf character is a technical skill that actors covet. as much as it is an identity. You know, so there was conversation in that article about his American Sign Language classes and, you know, what he did to prepare. And so it's not that that was even negative. It's not negative that he prepared for the role. What I think is frustrating is the way that the media romanticizes that to the nth degree. Any actor playing any role is going to do research if it's culturally specific, but it's ratcheted up a notch or two in the media.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember when in our early days of doing research for the film, there was a YouTube video that we were all captivated by. It was I can't remember the character's name in something about Mary. Warren, thank you. Where Warren was the actor, had this YouTube video demonstrating how he transformed himself from this kind of really good-looking, quirky guy into Warren, and how he added one physical property after another until he became Warren. And it was so gross that we really wanted to include it in the movie, but it didn't fit.
And the kicker on that example was that one of the things he cited as his inspiration were other movies. So he said, I took this part from Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man and this part, and he said that if you watch the movie, you'll see an homage to all the other characters. And so like, wow, we're not making this up. This isn't even just like an analysis that isn't connected to how some actors will base their characters on other stereotypes, and then they just keep getting moved further from the actual experience. Yeah.
Tying into that, you know, beyond just media representation, because media does try to, in some ways, reflect society, although sometimes not authentically. How does it serve society to make disabled people, some mythical idea or some, you know, faraway concept?
Well, okay, Carrie, were you going to say?
Oh, well, this goes back to again what Salome was saying about the horror trope. It transforms the disability experience into something knowable, something that you could overcome, something that you can contain, something that you can admire, all of these things. And I really see it happening with the current pandemic. There are so many people who are going to become disabled as a result of this. And there's so much fear right now that I think that these inspirational type narratives or overcoming narratives, or even narratives that explore the fear of disability, are getting to the heart of wanting to be able to control something about an experience that is so transformative. But it's not really helping the actual conditions of the people with disabilities. So I think it's just so apparent now with the pandemic. There's a lot of discussion about ongoing healthcare needs and financial resources to support people who have, what is it called, a COVID, long haul COVID?
The long haul.
Yeah, so I'm really interested to see how things are going to change based on the current social climate.
Right. For our audience out there, if they don't know, typically the idea in America is that about 25% of people are disabled. And I've been very fascinated by what long haul will mean in terms of upping that number quite dramatically. When you have almost half of society that might be in some form of disability, what's going to change? What's next? Do you guys have any vision or idea of that?
Could I tap back to that last question? Without derailing the conversation too dramatically. Yeah, for some reason, I've been watching some old movies that feature African-American male protagonists. A lot of them Sidney Poitier. And it's been interesting to me because it's so obvious that the Black character is treated the same way as the disabled character so often, in that they're the only one. You know, there's never two Black characters, and so obviously there's nobody to talk to, and it's all about their Blackness, and it serves to isolate the character, to show that that character is not really a part of the social world that's being recreated in the film. And I think that's true for the disabled character as well. So it creates this barrier between the disabled character or the Black character and everybody else. And of course, we'd get no sense of the disabled character or the Black character, whichever, in a community period. So it's very, I think, psychically very disturbing.
Yeah, I noticed how well you did that, both with gender and with race. It's really about the othering in films.
Mhm.
These are, this is not the white male majority, so this is them over there by themselves. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of including gender and race within the disability discussion?
Well, I mean, it's vitally important because disability is part of every identity group, right? It's one of the unique qualities of disability is that it can be any race, any gender, any religion, it's a human, part of the human condition. And so there are so many different kinds of impairments. People have very different experiences. As a person with physical disability, my experience is very different from someone who is deaf or blind. So having people that can delve into what is happening within those particularities, those intersections of identity are very differently experienced. Even someone with my same impairment who's a different gender or different race is going to have a very different experience. So I think that those particularities are important. And when we were doing the research for the film, it became pretty clear that most of the disability really specific films were white guys in wheelchairs, and you had fewer representations as you would go out, and maybe blind people would be the next more represented category. But I think that we also became surprised about what was not there. I mean, the gender stereotype, that's a good term. They were pretty obvious, once you see them, you can't unsee them. But what wasn't there, so we did see a strong representation of African-American men with disabilities, but where were Latinx people? Where are, people with Asian backgrounds or Asian Americans? Where is Native Americans? Where is anybody who is not
Black women? No African-American women.
Right, no African-American women, unless you start thinking a little more expansively about the categories. So the ones that we did see were women who had mental health issues, African-American women with mental health issues or substance use issues.
Yeah.
So one thing, I feel like this is turning into an analysis of Sound of Metal, but one thing I did really appreciate about that movie was that the character, he also had substance use issues. And the deaf community that he ends up engaging with is a deaf community that was also a community recovering from addiction. So I thought you never see like multiply disabled, and not just the one person, but actually a community of people who share these identities. So I think that's why it's so important, because disability is not experienced in isolation. It's about relationships to other people, both disabled and non-disabled.
And I think that ties now back into my long haul question of sort of, as disability grows in our community, in our world, what do you think the shift will look like? Will it be more understanding that there's such a nuanced, lots of different stories out there? Or do we need to look outside of the lens of Hollywood and hope that the independent film community really rises the boats? Or, I know that's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, what's going to happen. But I think that there's so much denial in our society already around, even around COVID. People are in hospitals dying of COVID and still denying its existence as a a threat to humanity. So it's hard to say. And I think in a lot of, well, in disability too, there's a lot of denial. People that could claim disability don't, for whatever reason they choose not to. So, and I know a lot of people that fall into that category. So, it's hard to say. I would imagine you'll have both. You'll have, but I do think, and the going back to an earlier point about seeing more of different diverse disabilities, such as deafness, in movies now, I think it's part of it too is a growing awareness, but also like technologically or aesthetically, our skills are expanding in terms of expressing various things that fall into reality or realism.
That's great.
I'm hearing so many of the tropes that we raised in the film coming up in discussions about COVID, and I'm thinking maybe something that could come out of this is people recognizing that when they experience illness or disability, it's going to be different from even how they're characterizing it. When one of the big ones is whose fault it is. I mean, when you hear about people talking about getting COVID, it's like, well, and I did everything right. There's this idea that if you do everything right, you won't have a disability or you won't get sick, or else being able to explain it. And, this is not going away quickly. And that really challenges the overcoming narrative. People may not get better. And what does that mean? And how do we take care of people as we are and what the conditions are without, feeling like, if we don't return to a state of normalcy, that, we can't, it just doesn't fit what the ideal is, I guess, perpetuated. And I feel like people, and I'm reading interviews about or hearing, just talking with friends on the phone, socially distanced, the things that they're saying kind of expose what the expectations are and the limits of those. Even medicine, right? Medicine is not being able to magically cure people. There's not always a fix. There's social fixes that need to happen as well as medical ones. Maybe that'll find its way into the movies.
I also think it's, it's really putting pressure on a human rights issue, which is that everybody belongs as we are, and everybody has rights to certain basic things like food and housing and healthcare and education. And so it's really kind of exposing the inequities in this society in particular. And I guess as the more widespread health issues become, as topics of conversation, and as more challenging the solutions become, hopefully, more of that becomes exposed.
Absolutely. And we're getting close to time, but I know you mentioned about something from Mary that you couldn't include. What are some other moments or scenes that you really wanted to fit in and just didn't have the ability to do so?
One of the ones surrounding intellectual disability, we were going to include that. And one of the things we noticed was a lot of the stereotypical portrayal, especially the physicality of people with intellectual disability. And when you started to kind of stream some of those together or do a mashup, they became so harmful. Like, it wasn't funny. A lot of our mashups end up being funny. I mean, even ones with the euthanasia, right? But it just, I think partly because, that we were hearing from people with intellectual disability in our community salons, their different relationships to the movies. And it didn't seem at all appropriate. It just seemed like that pushed over the line. And so we ended up not including that. That's just one example. I don't know if there's any that you can think of, Salome.
No, Carrie, that's a great point before Salome answers, because the ethics of documentary filmmaking come into play here. Because yes, you could have shown that, but doing more harm to the community you're trying to serve is not helping anyone. So go ahead.
I'm also thinking about people that we were going to include that we didn't, which we had a list of celebrities that we wanted to include. And we thought, you know, that would kind of be a big wow factor for the film. But we chose not to because we wanted people from our community, people that, and everybody involved in the film is a friend, colleague in some way. And there are people with a lot more celebrity, like Matt Fraser, and a lot of people that are just, you know, we go to school with. But we wanted that kind of range of relationship to both movies themselves, but also the images within the films.
It's wonderful. I think it was more heartfelt and better having real people, not just celebrities talking at you. So we're almost out of time, but I think knowing this film and the way I reacted, that our audience is going to have lots of questions and wants to follow up. Where can they learn more? How can they follow? Tell me your websites, your social media.
Well, our website is codeofthefreaks.com. So CODEOFTHEFREAKS.com. And we have a Facebook page as well that Carrie is so great about upkeeping. And then the Facebook page feeds into our website as well. So, and we have a study guide on the website that has all kinds of discussion questions that you could use with groups or classes. And it's got some really nifty resources.
And what's next for the film after the Southern Circuit tour? What does it go next?
Well, we're part of Real Abilities Film Festival, which has festivals all over, like Canada, United States, and Mexico. And we've been showing in a lot of those. And we also, Kino Lorber is our distributor. So that's been great in terms of getting North American screenings. But as well, we now have an international distributor, Reservoir Docs. So we've got, I think, New Zealand and Spain and Poland have just picked up the film, and they've only been working on it for a few weeks. So I think international screenings are going to really start blooming.
And disability is a global community, so I'm sure it'll resonate everywhere.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's available now on Canopy, which is a database that a lot of libraries use. And so I'm hoping that more educators will link to it as well. So since it's a service that's available to a lot of educational institutions.
That's perfect.
It's also available video on demand, Prime, Amazon Prime, Vudu, iTunes, Kino, whatever the Kino Lorber calls their theater, Kino Now, and a couple of others.
No reason to not tell everyone to go see it. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being here with me today. What a lovely conversation. What a wonderful film. I look forward to continuing to spread the word of this great documentary. So thank you so much. And thanks to South Arts and NEA.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.